So we're going to open the meeting of the City of Walker Planning Commission for June 7. First item, review the minutes from the May 17 meeting. Any comments, questions, motion?
I make a motion to accept.
Support.
Okay, motion by Pat, supported by Tyler to approve the minutes for May 17. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. At this point, this is an opportunity for general public comment. So if you're here and you want to speak to a non-agenda item, we have a short agenda this evening. So if you're not here, if you're here for that, but you have something else to say, you've got that opportunity. Otherwise, if there's no takers, we'll move right into the first item on the agenda. First agenda item, case number 23-009 is a site plan review, 2365 Northridge. And Paula, if you could, as a planning director, introduce the project, we'll go forward.
Thank you, Chair. I'd be happy to. So I might jump around a little bit here. I've got my report pulled up. We also have the plans, and for a little bit of context, I pulled up Google Earth here so we can see where in the city we're talking about. So this project is of, the Walkerview PUD, very large commercial and industrial planned unit development. I'm not sure why there we go. So this is outlined in orange here, the whole Walkerview PUD. That process started coming to the Planning Commission back in 2014 and was approved in 2015. Many of the parcels have since been developed, but we're talking about this one in red here. This is Walker Avenue and Northridge Drive to set the stage. The project that we're looking at tonight is a final area site plan for lot C3 of the Walkerview PUD for a 4-story, 103-room Homewood Suites hotel with a building footprint of just under 21,000 square feet, along with utilities, parking, landscaping, and other site improvements. The use fits the zone. This is a CPUD, so it fits within that area. The lot that we're talking about includes this space here, kind of to the south. That is a regional stormwater detention pond. And then there's a hotel surrounded by parking, landscaping. Yeah, this site in total is about just under 4 acres. But again, we're looking at kind of half of the site, as half of it is already used in this other way. From a planning perspective, after meeting with the developers at the Site Plan Review Committee meeting on May 11th, many of the concerns that we had were addressed. Really the only outstanding one that I'd like to call your attention to is about landscaping. The property is surrounded by commercial and industrial property on the sides of Walker Avenue that this property is on, and so that calls for a type A landscape buffer along the property edges. That's not fully met in some areas, mostly this north and east side, because the parking lot goes all the way to the property line. So they have the requisite number of shrubs present. There are no trees present that are called for. It is a planned unit development. There are many other trees on the site. That might be something the Planning Commission wants to discuss. I'm more concerned about the front of the property. Across Walker Avenue, there is residential zoned. There are residential properties there. And so that calls for a higher landscape buffer. There are the right number of trees. They're primarily on this southern part of the site, where there's a lot of nicely done landscaping there right now. The plan calls for a number of trees. The landscape plan here, we're looking at this side. This is Walker Avenue. There are a number of new trees planned to go in. My recommendation would be for those trees to be evergreen trees, as the buffer, the higher intensity buffer requires. And so that is one of the concerns that we have from a planning and zoning perspective. Most of the other ones were addressed. I know that the city engineer has a few as well. The other thing I wanted to make sure to call your attention to, is not noted in the plan, or in my staff report, apologies, because it has come out more recently, but there have been some talks between city folks and the Michigan State Police that have some concerns about the height of the hotel kind of overlooking their property, which is immediately adjacent to this one. Something for the Planning Commission to be aware of. So we're looking at this property here. The hotel would go kind of where the stand of trees is now, and this is the new Michigan State Police facility. And there were some concerns that they had about a 4-story hotel overlooking the back lot that they have. So that's something for the Planning Commission to consider as well, a little in terms of how the adjacent uses are compatible. And that's what I have for you. I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Paula, with regard to the landscaping along the Walker frontage, I can appreciate there's a desire to get a better buffer between the land uses on the east side of the street versus the west side, being residential over there. But with regard to evergreens in that area closer to the street, as they grow over time, whether that might represent a site obstruction for motorists entering and exiting the site.
It's definitely crossed my mind. It is a concern. I brought it up, and say anything about that in terms of visibility or driving, and so that's something, especially as this is a planned unit development, you might want to consider those other factors, and that might kind of tip the scale in terms of the trees that they have being the appropriate number of trees, and in this buffer area being appropriate for those other considerations.
Yeah, it's a matter of kind of balancing out the buffering for the different uses with regard to the traffic safety, clear vision coming out onto the property, out onto the street. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Scott Connors, City Engineer, if you could share your comments.
Sure. Could you go back to that aerial image?
Of course.
If you can see right here where Paula called out where lot C3 is, it kind of goes up into the woods there. Further north, there's 2 more commercial lots, lots C1 and C2, and they were kind of set aside at the very beginning of this development. I think they really focused on the industrial parcels. So the access for these parcels really wasn't as thought out as we would like. It was kind of a compromise, and we gave up a little bit there. We allowed them to put one driveway in, which you can see from the picture, and that's the main driveway that's proposed for the hotel. But we had planned for the rest of these lots to all have back and internal access to get to Northridge, because they didn't want to improve Walker Avenue. So traditionally, if you don't improve the frontage, you can't improve the property. But this was a compromise here where we said, we'll allow these lots, but you have to come in off the back. And I think wisely now, the developer, the underlying developer of Walkerview is back, and they're saying we just can't develop them like that, which I think is true. And so they're going to have to improve that street out front in order to get those additional driveways that they would like for lots C1 and C2, and to have a second driveway for C3, which is shown here on the plan as dashed. So we did get, between the time we wrote our memo and now, we did get a conceptual layout for the street, and I think that's something that we can work with. There's some details that need to be added and adjusted, but they had asked for another driveway now, so they would like 3 new ones in addition to this existing one that's shown here. So that's probably going to end up being in an agreement because it requires plans that formal city plans. It requires inspection, escrows, turning it over to the city in the end. So there's going to be some steps that have to be gone through there. I would say for purposes of tonight, you're really looking at just the existing driveway as access. And if they want to get that other driveway later, it's going to require all those improvements, yet to be determined. So consider that just one driveway. We did ask that the additional 2 driveways that we agreed to bring to you at staff level, that they would be placed on the property lines between C1 and C2, and then C2 and C3. And in this case, I think they pulled that driveway further onto the hotel property. So that's, again, something for you to consider, whether that site really is worthy of 2 full driveways. We will need a cross-access easement along the center of that parking aisle that's along Walker Avenue. Again, that's so that we can, as much as possible, have activity back and forth across these sites. If you end up with a restaurant and a hotel, obviously those are really compatible. We'd want to make sure that people can get back and forth. We had hoped for some access to the south too, so that people could get to that light if they needed to turn left, because that's going to be a little bit tough here on Walker Avenue. But that's not shown or proposed here. The south part of the site does encroach the stormwater detention easement. So I think there's really 2 issues there from an engineering perspective. One is the practical issue of, does it impede on the stormwater volume that was agreed to there? So the engineer that's designing this site also designed the underlying Walkerview site, so that should be easy enough for them to prove. But the ordinance also doesn't allow structures in easements, and so they're proposing a retaining wall in that easement. So that might be something that has to go to ZBA. I'm going to defer to Paula on how she would want to handle that, but it would not be consistent with our ordinance for work in easements. The sanitary sewer and water that's shown on here is coming in from the southeast at Northridge, and then it comes up to the southeast corner of the building along the east side, and then it goes into lot C2, kind of in the middle of lot C2. We really want to see that one go all the way to the front or all the way to the back. We don't want that to stub out right to a building on C2 and then cut off access to lot C1, which would be further north. So we really need them to put that at one side or the other. And there's a storm sewer that's proposed along the front of the property that would convey water from lots C1 and C2 into the detention pond. And with different owners on the properties, that should be in an easement as well, so that the owner of C3 doesn't get mad at C1 and 2 later and plug it, block it. It's got to be in a private drainage easement for their use. That kind of covers the items that we had, and I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Any comments or questions for Scott? With regard to the driveways, if you could back up and describe that over again, what has been previously, as far as the preliminary FASP, what did it identify as far as access onto Walker for C3 as well as C1 and C2?
Right. So what it identified a driveway that was built as part of that larger project on Walker Avenue, just the one single driveway, because they didn't want to build those improvements further north.
Okay.
So that's all that they can get, according to the PASP. You could change that, but we would, highly recommend that we don't put a bunch of commercial driveways on an agricultural road. It's just a bad practice.
Yep.
We need drainage, we need curb and gutter, we need a center turn lane with capacity to hold the traffic so that we don't end up with rear end accidents. Fully improved street there. So that's really all they get at this point, unless they come in, and I think the underlying property owner is still Rockford Development or a subset of them.
Yep.
They would have to come in and then negotiate this arrangement to be able to build that improvement on Walker Avenue now.
Well, and when you say that it sounds like it could involve not only the one that's in place, but also as many as 3 others along through there, I guess it gives me pause to take action on this tonight, given that circumstance, because drive access and in this case timing those with street improvements is something you want to look at thoroughly, and I don't think as a planning commissioner we've got enough information at this point to be talking about as many as 4 along through there. So that's something I'd have concern with at this juncture.
Which, on this, what's in front of us, which one's not on the property line? That one?
That one, yeah, it's lined up with their aisle, and if they were, you know, kind of living on an island, so to speak, that would probably be the right place
Okay,
for
and that's
it.
where the road narrows, that's pretty accurate on where the road narrows there?
I would assume so.
Wow. I would have an issue with that.
And I guess this may be a question I should have asked for Paula to begin with. I'm acquainted with another zoning ordinance a little bit better than this one right here. And so when you have a preliminary area site plan for a PUD, in this case here, this is the first time we're actually seeing a building footprint of how this portion of the development would be taking place. So there wasn't a prior one that showed a typical or a conceptual building location. This is the first time we're seeing one on that.
This is the first one. I have not seen any others. I dug through some of the history when the larger PUD went through the initial hearing, the PASP was approved, the PASP was amended. I didn't see anything that showed another potential, a typical building, other things. This is the first I've seen on here. The PASP, they talked about uses, nothing about hotels being excluded. A few uses were excluded. This one is allowed from that initial plan. But that drive access was a key point of the initial PASP approval. And with the compromise, from what I read, was that one drive was put in, this southerly one here, with the intention, if the road was not developed further, that there would be interior access to the other sites.
Okay. And I think looking, what I did follow is that I believe with the exhibits that were with the PASP, it identified this lot C3 to be for highway commercial uses. And so that kind of gives you direction as far as the menu of different type of uses that could be on the property. And hotel or motel is one of those that would be a permitted use.
Yes.
It would appear.
And Terry, you're right, we did not require this developer to put together a real PASP as we would normally see that shows potential building locations and parking, because it was such a big site and there were so many unknowns.
Yep.
That was another concession that was made to say that, hey, we can be a little more flexible there, but, you know, now we have to pay up because we didn't draw anything in at all.
Yeah, yeah. And that includes, sounds like lots C1 and C2. Likewise, no prospective building envelopes identified on there to give a sense on that was a direction. It was more general as to how that might develop.
I believe that was done intentionally. There was some discussion in those preliminary approvals about lot lines potentially being changed depending on what projects were brought forward. And we've seen that with other projects in the Walkerview PUD. So I think that was done intentionally. Although some lot lines were drawn, they had to be specifically approved recently, that this lot was created according to those lines just recently for this project.
Yeah, and as I recall, in the last several years, there's been any number of redefinition of what constitute the developed lot that they were proposing for review. Again, that underscores, from my standpoint, on not just C3, but C1 and C2, we've got to bring it up to date as far as how we view that, whether it be access as well as use, to, I guess, fit within the overall development of the property. I've got an off-the-wall question for Scott. Okay, you've got detention area that's portrayed here. It was built and in accord with the original approval on that. I guess with anything, that easement, is it possible that could be relocated?
Yeah, we've had that happen a few times where the easement is either rescinded and replaced or adjusted. And certainly they've got all the survey work that they would ever need to be able to make that happen.
Yep.
As long as it still meets the intent of what we had initially.
Yeah.
And they'll still have to take care of the stormwater quality component for this site as well, so they'll have to come up with some innovation there for that.
Yeah, and the reason I ask that is that because this is a heavily wooded site, and mention was made about the proximity of the state police facility nearby, and it's going to be quite a change in circumstance to have all that tree buffer there, be it from commercial to industrial, but again, it's a substantial tree buffer that with the development plan, it would basically take, it looks like it would take all of those down. And as you look at how the different configurations of what is currently C1, C2, and C3, and the detention pond, it seems like you've got a lot of variables there to come up with perhaps ways to accomplish these type of projects, but maybe with some additional sensitivity to the common borders between the proposed uses and what's in place. Because that area, Paula, just to the east along Northridge, that area right there, that's in the industrial PUD portion of it, correct? Those are commercial as well. Okay. Yep. Those are the five, okay. For some reason I thought, well, okay. All right. At this point, if there's no other questions, if we could have the developer and the representative come forward and describe their proposal for the development of the site.
Sure. Good evening. Justin Longstreth with Moore & Brugink, representing the applicant who's here tonight. I think the project itself, hotel, is pretty standard. We are all pretty comfortable and know what those are. So if we could maybe just pick off some of the items off of the city engineer's list, and we can talk about those in a little bit more detail. And we'll start with the driveway discussion, because I get the sense from a planning commission standpoint that maybe gives the most angst. So our proposed driveway configuration with this project alone is to just only use the single driveway that's on site currently. Our original plan did show a proposed driveway north of that current one, the one that's kind of dashed in on the site plan. But after meeting with staff during the site plan review meeting, it became pretty clear that that driveway was not going to happen without some improvements to Walker Avenue. And so as part of that, with that feedback, we wanted to show a placeholder for a potential second drive. But at this point, there's no intention of building that until a Walker Avenue improvement is made. And I guess I would also second that the driveway location itself certainly is not set in stone. It's just a placeholder again. Scott had mentioned how that driveway might want to be relocated and be centered on the C3, C2 property line. One of the things that would complicate that is there's a fairly large consumer's energy pole that's located right on the property line. So my guess is that if that was the desire, it probably would want to slide north onto the C2 property and not be right on the property line, because it would be a fairly large expense to have to relocate a pole for that driveway. So again, we're not trying to say just because it's shown on the plan that that is our only location for a driveway. I think with the shared access easement across the front that Scott had mentioned previously, if the driveway flips a little bit further north and is on C2 and there's a shared access between the two, we'd be perfectly okay with that condition. Now, it would be a matter of timing. I don't know when Walker Avenue would be improved. I don't know when C1 or C2 would be improved. But what I do know is that our project can act as a standalone project with the single driveway that's out there today. And we're okay with that condition for as much time as it needs for the rest of the road and those outlots to the north to work themselves out. So I guess I just want to clarify that. We're by no means saying this shall be where the driveway is. There's obviously some plans, like Scott had alluded to, that we need to work through with city staff, not just on the driveway locations, but the whole road corridor from the existing driveway north to the north C1 line. So I just, unless there's any questions, I guess I want to just get your guys' feedback before we maybe move on to some of the other items.
Yeah, I think,
Fair enough. I mean, it seems like the majority of traffic's gonna come from that original driveway anyway, coming off the freeway, so, yeah, that's good to know. Thank you.
Okay. Utility location, we do have, or we are routing public utilities, water and sanitary sewer from the adjacent property owner. That was in accordance with the original PASP plan. I think on the original plan, it looked at bringing that parallel with our east property line and terminating at the C2 property line. When we got into the detail grading of this site plan, there's a fairly significant, almost 20 feet of grade differential from the southwest corner to the northeast corner. And when you look at our development and the footprint that our pad is taking up, it really became necessary to put a retaining wall in without having that grading extend onto the Michigan State Police property, which is not going to happen. And so we, instead of running it right to that northeast corner, we did bring it in just far enough so that it was outside of the influence of the retaining wall that we're proposing. We terminated it there only because without knowing what's going to happen north of us, you know, you're going to probably guess wrong either way. I also know that we need to work with city staff and City of Grand Rapids staff on that location, and if that wants to slide to the front, then that's what we'll do. But certainly work with both city staffs on that location. And then the last thing is the storm sewer. When that stormwater basin was constructed, there actually was excess capacity built above and beyond what the original design calculations required. And so we're comfortable, being the design engineer for the pond, but also this site, that we can encroach into that existing pond a bit and eat up some of that excess capacity that was built at the original construction. One of the reasons that we're proposing a retaining wall on that south property line, or south parking lot line, as opposed to just a graded slope, is to try and limit the amount of encroachment into that volume. With a retaining wall, it's essentially a vertical wall, as opposed to a graded slope would extend out and eat up a little bit more of that excess capacity. So with that retaining wall and the excess capacity, we feel like we can meet the original design intent of the stormwater basin calculations, even though we're getting into the easement. And then, Terry, you had mentioned possibly relocating the existing easement. That's exactly our plan for this, and we actually have it shown on the site plan where we would work with the city to abandon or otherwise reconfigure that so that the stormwater easement wasn't in any sort of conflict with any structures, including the retaining wall.
yeah, I was wondering whether with that change, it would also redefine what encompasses the easement.
It would. So the current easement does extend into the proposed parking lot just a bit. So we would need to move that south so that it terminated at the, what I'll call the south line of the retaining wall, so that the retaining wall was not in that easement.
Okay. Any other questions, comments for Justin? Is there anything else on the use of the property that you guys wanted to offer this evening?
No, I mean, it's Homewood Suites hotel. All of the rooms are suites. On an average, say if the hotel was at 100% capacity, you would probably see 60% of those residents or guests would be extended stay, multiple day stays. 40% would be what we call transient, or kind of the one night stay. But otherwise, it's a hotel, so.
Was there consideration given as far as an alternative other than a 4-story facility?
I think that the corporate standard for Homewood Suites is 4-story. I think most hotels nowadays are, and so I don't think there was any consideration for that, no.
Okay. Commissioners, well, at this point, thank you, Justin. Gentlemen out in the audience, did you have any questions? This is not a public hearing, but at the same time, if someone shows up for the meeting, we give them an opportunity to offer comment if they'd like to. Okay, all right, all right. At this point, this talking about C1, C2, and C3, it would have been ideal, obviously not going to happen right at this point, to have someone for Rockford here to talk about not just C3, but in this case, C1, C2, C3 at the same time, but then the other commercial lots, now that we're far enough further down the line in terms of the development process, a good portion of the industrial uses have been put into place, and we're working on these commercial right here to take a more comprehensive look at these properties, because this is a key one right here as far as what that might mean for the other remaining properties.
So, I'm not from Rockford, but I went there once, so I'll represent them here.
Okay.
This is a concept that Justin put together just to kind of show the proof of concept really of how they would potentially adjust the road. There's some chicken scratches on here about taper lengths and stuff like that. I wouldn't focus on that too much, but you can kind of see the existing driveway and then the 3 others that would be proposed, and then the turn lane to help protect those. And if you've driven out there and looked, there's a little shallow ditch there, so you've got to have a real road. It's got to be curb and gutter, you got to collect the storm sewer, or collect the ditch water with the storm sewer, get it to the pond, make sure the driveways are appropriate. And I think in our case, the future driveway layout 2 would be about the max that we would be comfortable with. It's starting to be, for this location, at this setting, having driveway after driveway after driveway seems a bit much.
Yep.
But I think if they can extend that center turn lane, and the 3-lane section seems appropriate right through here, we could probably work with that, but the devil's in the details now, working through all this. And again, this would be a Rockford initiative to enable them to sell and develop lots C1 and C2. And Justin, I think, works for just about everybody, so he might be able to comment a little bit more. But I'll leave it at that for me.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know that I can comment fully for Rockford construction. I know that obviously C1 and C2 have been a tough sell. They obviously have not developed to this point. And so I think if and when they have a user on board and a deal becomes more real, I think that you'll probably start to see a little bit more momentum and coordination with the city on some of these things. But right now, until they have a buyer on the hook, it's a tough deal for them to try and tackle all of these improvements at this time without some sort of payback at the end.
Okay.
I think the hope would be that this hotel go in and it really is the catalyst that starts the chain down the road, and maybe you, fingers crossed, see something sooner rather than later with this construction and this activity on the corner.
Okay, thank you. Yep. Commissioners, your thoughts as we look at the project?
Is there concern being up against the police, the state police? Is there, I know there's been a little bit of rumblings, but I don't know how serious that is.
That'd be mine too. As it looks right now, there's a great tree buffer right now. Is that going to be disappeared? Are people looking on that northeast corner going to have a clear view of that back lot? I mean, what kind of concern is that from their perspective, from our perspective? That'd be something I'd like to know.
Yeah, is state police concerned about it? Like gated off like a Fort Knox, but, and they store stuff back there. It's just a concern. Uses butting up against each other. I don't know how to address that or how to leave that, so.
Right. And they take all those trees down, then you also have the industrial lots to the east of that. Those two lots could be developed and all those trees would be gone. Then you got another hotel across the street pointing right directly at the state police too. I mean, I have family in law enforcement, so it's not been a great 3 years for law enforcement, so it is a concern, it is a worry in today's world, but I mean, it's how it affects this development, I don't really know. I wish the state police would have had a little bit more forethought of putting more stuff in the back of their lot. But, yeah, it's definitely a concern.
That's what I heard.
I received a call from someone at the state police last week. They were very concerned. They expressed a lot of concern. I know they've spoken, I connected them to the mayor. They would wanted to speak with him. So there have been several conversations had that I was not. There was talk about a captain from the state police potentially coming tonight. They decided not to do that. What they expressed to me was that they have a lot of concern with the orientation of the building and rooms directly overlooking, like viewing toward their facility. But they also understand that property owners have rights to develop their property. And so trying to balance that, I think might be part of the calculus on why they didn't come tonight. They're a good neighbor to the city, in our community here. So I think they have a lot of concerns that they're weighing, but conversations have been had. Scott?
Well, I was gonna say, maybe they understand that the hotel has a right to, come in here and propose to put a building there. Maybe you can find some little things to do to help mitigate that, like requiring that the windows on the east side of the building are fixed, can't be opened. That's a good start. We've got an expert in the back row here on law enforcement. He might have some ideas as well.
I guess as I've been thinking about this, with their right to build, I hesitate to say no, and not to criticize the state police, but weren't they thinking ahead? They could have bought the land around it, especially at the price tag they put on that whole development. That would have been not been that much more. I mean, I'm just playing devil's advocate there too. But for us to say no to this development just because it's up against that, I'm a little bit.
Well, and there's also 5 other lots that can
Yeah.
be developed that are even closer than this one.
Yeah.
And who knows what's gonna go in those?
And the retaining wall should also help, because, the grade in here goes up so high that, the first floor is gonna be down quite low, probably the second floor also, and then you're gonna get maybe just to the top where you can see over into the backyard for the state police. And I think that's the sensitive part is, watching their operations, seeing them respond. That might get a little tricky.
Are there any trees left? Sorry, you're gonna say something. Is there any trees left in the corner?
There
facing-
won't be.
That's what it looks like.
So on this picture though, I'm not sure how many of those trees are located on the state police's property versus ours. We're taking our trees out right to the property line and we're putting a wall in. I don't know how many are still left over on their property.
I can just point it out. The property line of this lot stops somewhere here. So this white shirt, that's where our C3 lots end.
So there may be some left over. But what I wanted to say is the windows, none of the windows in this hotel open. They're all fixed now, for what it's worth.
No balconies or anything like that?
No. No.
It seems to me that, I was looking over the plans, if I can remember to find that. They show the relative grade on this site compared to surrounding properties. And at that southwest portion of the state police site, I believe they do have, they created, it looks like it's a man-made grade established there that's, goes up somewhat in that area of the site. Yeah, right along through there. So, that wouldn't preclude them from, vegetating that or building something in that area if that perhaps is a concern between the two properties.
Sorry to keep standing up and sitting down, but kind of the top of that berm that's on their property is almost 15 feet higher than our parking lot grade. So you're probably, the first story certainly would be behind the retaining wall, and a portion of the second story certainly would also be, so,
Yeah,
for what it's worth.
yeah, because I think this, as a 4-story, it goes up, the finished floor, I had it written down someplace here. 748.5, and then you got another, I think, 47 feet from finished floor to the top of the building.
Seven what? 40?
748.5, I think.
Yes, that's correct.
At the corner, you're at 764, and when you go up that berm, you're at 768 and even higher. So I mean, you're coming from the base, the bottom floor of the bottom floor, that's 748 up to 768, or you're 20 feet up. Plus the berm goes a little higher, and I don't have exact measurements, so.
Yeah,
I mean, you're almost 2 stories there.
yeah.
It seems like the concern would be site access or site view.
Of the,
And I don't think you can put any vegetation there to stop that.
Yeah.
It's 4 stories high.
Yeah, it would take,
yeah, you're not gonna wall it,
Yeah.
stop it.
20 years of tree growth.
yeah, you'd have to have a man-made wall, probably.
A big one.
Yeah, yep. But,
You guys have a tough job.
Yeah.
yeah, because I think that, looking at this, they got the berm there, then it goes down, then it comes back up, and then they've got pretty tall building there as we look at, we're just looking at the back of it, I think from 4 Mile, it's even, higher off of, and the relative grade in there. And I think it is correct as far as, it looks like maybe 15 to 20% of the site, that northeast corner of the proposed site, actually fronts on state police property. The majority of it is along the back of C4, or along the side of C4.
Yeah, and, what Dan said is, what if other people, I think Dan said, other C4 and C5 will be built out, what do we tell them?
Yeah,
I guess I'm a little disturbed that they raise the concern and then don't show up to
That's my thing,
voice them.
But it's hard for us to take any action on something that we've heard through the grapevine.
Right, so
Yeah.
we're sitting here with legitimate concerns from a Michigan State Police post, and then by right, they have the right to build, so it's like, I'm a little bit confused, maybe we need some leadership from the chair. I like beating up on you, Justin, but I just can't right now, sorry.
well, in this case, looking at the site design, they got the 4-story area, they got it closer to Walker than it is to that north lot line, or northeast lot line. And as far as redoing that site plan and putting that building closer and put all your parking out there, what you're gaining really is distance. And it's not so much the distance, I think it's the relative elevation of the properties that comes into play. And maybe it is, as I think Scott or Paula mentioned, is that at best we're looking at what measures they would take to assure that those especially those upper floor suites would not have the ability to open those up. That's the best we can do. And I think Paula, do we have the elevations? Building elevations for the, all right. So we're probably key in on the east elevation then, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you could walk us through, gentlemen representing the development of this, those windows that we see on the uppermost portion of that. Do those on the 1, 2, 3, 4, the first 5 from going right to left, I'm presuming that those are for suites for the rooms, and then as you go to the next 4 thereafter, the ones that are more square, at least some of them might be just the windows that are in the stairwell. But I don't know if that's the case all the way over to the far left. Of course, the far left is probably not in the direct sight line as much of the state police property.
I guess the issue is if this was anywhere else, it'd be a slam dunk, because it just, so I'm in a conundrum, just to be honest.
Yep.
It'd probably take all night for me to figure this out as well, just to see if there's any precedent for another hotel overlooking another facility like this somewhere in the state. I don't know if we can find that in the next, few minutes, but this is kind of unique.
And you might find another one here 6 months from now, just north of this building.
Yeah.
Because, they tend to repopulate like rabbits, so.
Well, and that's why it's unfortunate we don't have anybody from Rockford here, because it's not just a question that's going to come up on this particular property. It's going to be for C1, C2, and C4 and C5.
Well, it's also a question for the state police, is what is acceptable there?
Yeah.
And if you can't agree on it, why don't you just buy it?
Yeah.
And I don't mean to be rough, but that's what we tell other people when they don't like what's being built is.
I mean, the good thing is that there's a courtyard facing that corner, so it's not like corner rooms are even closer to the state police. I mean, that's a good layout of the hotel if we had to put something there facing the state police. But, I mean, to me, if for any reason we could keep some of those tree lines, but with the layout, you can't.
Yep.
But again, it's the state police who's got the property in the back there. They could put a bunch of trees in, but again, it's gonna take 15, 20 years to get a tree that's gonna block a 4-story
Yep.
look.
Yep. Well, forgive me, but I've got to ask the question, would the applicant be willing to table this until at least our next meeting, to give us a chance to kind of think this through?
unique situation, certainly. It is a unique situation, and, you know, if we're back here in 2 weeks on the next agenda, if we can, then I think, I don't want to force, planning commission to make a decision that you're uncomfortable with either, right? So, I mean, we want to work together and see, but unfortunately, there's not a lot in our control beyond this lot that's going to change anything.
You've been here several thousand times. You know we work with people and everything. You know that we're not just
No, absolutely. Yep.
off the cuff. This is just a concern, and I would like to hear a little bit more
Sure.
from our officials and their officials on, you know, and it's not just this lot, it's all those lots around it. It's like, what do the state police want? And they're a big resident here, and it was a pleasure. I just want to hear what they have on mind, and if they can't come to a conclusion, then we have to come to a conclusion, and that by rights is by rights, so.
And it might not hurt to have all three parties, including Rockford Construction, in the same room to have just a candid discussion about what can we do collectively to help.
Yeah.
Because it's not just this lot, it's the others, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
so it's
I
worth
mean,
it for
it's a
Rockford.
real conundrum, and it's just growing. So I guess with that, I would make a motion to table until, I would say, a month, so that we can get our parties together. It's the next meeting in July.
The first meeting in July is
Yeah.
when you'd like to see it back?
Yeah.
Is that
Is that adequate to get the people together?
adequate to get the people together, and do you have things already set up for that agenda?
The deadline for that agenda was today. I don't believe anything came in. So I believe that agenda is currently open. My other question to the board would be, what else would you like me to bring back to you? I can obviously invite and cajole the parties to all attend the meeting to have that conversation. Is there any other information that I or Scott could bring you that would help facilitate discussion and decision-making?
I would suggest that all parties read the minutes to what we've just discussed, because there's a lot that's been said in the last 30 minutes raising the concerns, and it shouldn't take them that long rather than just giving you suggestions. Now, there's been a lot of suggestions through it, so.
In the facilitative nature of the parties might be better outside of this public forum for the first time.
Yep.
If we can just get them into a little working group or something to come down for half
Who
an
do we
hour.
leave in charge of this once we table it?
One of us.
I can absolutely facilitate a meeting to get them, the developer in this
Okay.
case, Rockford, and try to get the
What I'm
state
saying
police
is I don't
on
want to
board.
go out of this meeting without a plan.
Yep.
And then it just falls dead. So that's my motion.
A question on the driveways.
Yep.
So the second one is kind of off the table.
You guys can probably,
I'm not gonna vote for that. If they want that second one, I'm gonna say no.
I would say this, I think you really almost need to go back to the PASP and amend it to add these street improvements and to add that access. So I think you do have an ability to say yes or no, or how many or where. Maybe that's another part of this that would be nice to firm up, I suppose. But I guess if Rockford's not gonna wanna just come in and, like Justin said, they're not gonna wanna just spend all this money on speculation. Although that's how development
And they've
occurs.
shown that they can use the one driveway and make it work. So-
Yeah.
And make it work, so right now that's off the table in my opinion.
I guess we're looking at a final area site plan. I think it should be final.
But-
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I'd
to-
like to see the
Maybe
final areas.
to add to Justin's comment about the pole being in the way of that second driveway if it was on the property line, that does make sense that it would be better than to just move it north. And then these guys don't have to worry about coming back later and paying anything either. It would be installed by that developer or by Rockford if as they were going by, they could put those in. And it's cleaner so that you're not asking this guy to come back and do something later, because I hate doing that, because
Yeah.
it's hard to tell an owner at some future point, you're gonna have to pay a bunch of money for something and we don't know when and we don't know where. So that would be cleaner.
Okay. So are we saying a month, or are we saying in the,
I'm saying the first weekend, the first meeting in July.
okay,
That's my motion.
okay.
That's your motion. I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor and a second. With the indulgence of the applicant, we're looking at tabling action on this until the first meeting in July, with the hope that all parties can get together in the meantime, not necessarily, hopefully before the public meeting, to discuss the future development in this area, and yeah. Okay, all those in favor of tabling indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you very much.
Here, July 5th.
No vacation.
Somebody's on vacation, or was on vacation. All right, thank you.
Well, COVID says you can do it remote, right?
Not anymore.
Go to that hotel that's already there, go to that floor, and see what kind of sightline you have from that already. To say, I mean, you just do something to this hotel, but you've already got a sightline from that one.
Yep,
If those trees are gone, because the new development comes in, takes those trees out and puts in a warehouse, puts whatever, single story. You get the same issue that we're talking about tonight on the existing hotel.
Well, if you go up there with binoculars, you're liable to end up in handcuffs, so be careful.
What are you doing up there, sir? You come with me, sir.
just show them your planning commission badge.
Yeah, that'll get,
that'll be
get out of jail free card, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, Paula,
Well, that was
thanks, Scott.
a hard one.
That's difficult.
Just have them dig up the old trees, move them over to the north, east, and replant them.
The collaborative part of this too could result in, maybe they're paying for trees that go on the Michigan State property.
I thought about suggesting
Better
that.
buffering to know that they have a better time with putting in other 2, 3, 4-story buildings. So we just gotta get in the same room.
Yep.
Thank you.
Bye, Scott.
Because I looked at the Kent County jail map, there isn't anything around there that's really tall, so.
Yeah. Paula,
Yes, we have one other thing on the agenda. This came up after the zoning ordinance subcommittee met 2 weeks ago. They wanted to make sure that the full planning commission heard about the work to date. And so Chris Corey, our consultant from McKenna, put this memo together for me to share with you all. And where are my notes? So at that last meeting, 2 of the new chapters were discussed, articles. Article 13 is neighborhood design, Article 18 is policies and processes and procedures. And so just quickly to go through this with you all, really these 2 chapters are kind of combining things that were disparate and spread throughout the ordinance into one place where they logically go together. So it's a lot of restructuring for administrative purposes, and then the new items are highlighted here. So first we have the water and sewer connections. If a lot is not connected to public water and sewer, then they're restricted from accessing the full rights of the district. Basically, it's agricultural or single family if you don't have access to water. So it limits what you can develop there. Road networks, in order to promote connected neighborhoods, this really says that with all of the new residential developments we're seeing, even some of the larger industrial ones that we've seen, the roads need to become public city roads. And there's a waiver process, there's a few things, there's exceptions if the road does not access any non-residential land uses, accesses 4 or fewer housing units, or is not located in the AA district. But really it's intended to make sure that we have high quality roads up to the city standard, and then they get turned over to the city. Also about the layout, so when there is a new development, it must connect to all existing public streets that abut the development. I know you've seen that come through for many of our neighborhoods, that was, some do, some don't, but making sure that they all do, and that there are stubs built when other new neighborhoods come in that are adjacent to greenfields or land that could potentially be redeveloped in the future. No dead ends, no gated communities. Sidewalks are required. Again, there's a waiver process if there's topographical issues, special circumstances mean that it's impractical. The Planning Commission could waive that. Otherwise, all sidewalks along all public road frontages. The open space requirement, this is currently in our ordinance. Frank has told me it's never been used, but it's still in there, and it's being amended a little bit to change some things so that all developments are the working group proposing to require all developments that include more than 50 housing units and the construction of new roads to reserve at least 10% of their area for recreational open space. I think that was like the language was less firm, and the working group said, no, we think that should be required. And then there's some engineering things that are, the engineering, Scott and his team are going through all of the changes that have been done so far, all of the existing engineering ordinances spread throughout the city code of ordinances and the zoning ordinance, kind of putting them all in one place, making sure they're consistent, and the ones that are kind of rules and guidelines that really should be ordinances are going to end up probably in here to make sure they're fully enforceable. And then Article 18 hasn't really changed much at all. Again, combining some things. Special exceptions and unique uses are being combined to special uses. Non-residential accessory buildings don't need planning commission approval if they're smaller than 2,400 square feet. And there are subdivision guidelines that are being combined into this chapter from a different section. So it's a lot of reconfiguring, some changes, but the working group all had good things to say and was really trying to make sure that when things came up that sounded very firm, that there were waiver processes and things that when special circumstances arises, the Planning Commission has the authority to provide a little bit of flexibility. That's my summary. I'm sure if Stephen were here, he would give a much more clear and direct kind of, here's why we did these things, but I did my best.
When I was reading it, it was like, wow, this gets strict, but the planning commission did this. Wow, this gets strict, but the planning commission can do this, which I don't say is bad. It puts it in stone and then says, but you have to convince the planning commission that something else should be done. I liked it. That was just my comment.
So that is kind of where they're at. I also, Chris also put together a schedule. So the working group, the staff working group is getting together again. The subcommittee will be reconvening in mid-July, and then there is a timeline kind of chipping away at all of the remaining elements until a full draft is planned to come to this board in October, and for initial kind of see it all together at kind of an informational session, and then we'll do a public hearing and then recommendation. So there's going to be some time to review all of the pieces when they come together, and I'll keep you updated as the different sections keep getting more and more finalized. But the end goal is hoping to have it recommended from this board to the city commission by the end of this calendar year, and then kind of adopted in Q1 of *24.
I tend to agree with Tyler on the non-residential accessory buildings. I think that's a good direction. I would also encourage them to take a look at the threshold of an industrial expansion of a main use building if it's going to expand. Think about maybe putting that threshold a little bit higher so it has, so in other words, instead of, I don't know, if it's 4,000 square foot is the threshold, maybe we go up to 8,000 square foot. So everything up to 8,000 could be handled on an administrative level rather than having to go to the planning commission.
It's currently set at a percentage. I believe it's 25% of the existing building for industrial buildings. Anything, an expansion of it's 20 or 25% can be go through the administrative process. If it's higher than that, it goes to this board. So were you thinking in a separate or in addition if it's a small building that is doubling, but it's small?
No, I guess the percentage probably is better than just saying a number.
Yeah.
Cause it's a 10,000 square foot building and they wanna, well, then if it's 10,000 square foot building and they wanna put 2,500 on, they're still gonna have to come to us.
That's,
Maybe there should be a percentage or a minimum square feet.
yeah, for those smaller buildings, because, it just slows down the
It
development
would really
process.
slow it down and
Yeah.
it has to come to us and we all sit here and go, yeah.
Of
duh.
course. I can bring that up with Chris and see what his recommendations are and bring that back to the working
Yeah,
group. That's a great
percentage
suggestion.
Or a minimum for a smaller building, something like that.
Okay. That's all that I have for you tonight. We've got 2 projects coming for our second meeting in June. One is a substation, kind of a unique project. ITC is doing a new substation for their high transmission power lines.
Oh, no.
And we've got adjacent to the Taco John's that was recently approved, the credit union just south of that, the bank just south of that is being redeveloped by a credit union. So there's some building expansions and some parking lot reconfigurations and things going on there. So it's nice to see kind of that stretch of Alpine getting a facelift.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right, anything else?
I will miss that meeting in 2 weeks. I'll be on vacation.
Okay.
And I'll make,
That's not allowed.
that one,
I quit.
make the motion to adjourn.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Thank you.